Question 1. Compliance review shows that an Alabama real estate broker is representing a seller who insists on including a contract clause stating that the buyer waives all rights to inspect the property's condition prior to closing, regardless of any findings. What is the most appropriate course of action for the broker? Option A. Include the clause exactly as the seller requested, as it is the seller's property and their decision. Option B. Immediately terminate the listing agreement, citing the seller's unreasonable and potentially illegal request. Option C. Advise the seller that such a clause is likely unenforceable under Alabama law and may be considered misleading, and explain the importance of allowing buyer inspections. Option D. Advise the seller that the clause is acceptable and will be fully enforced by the courts. The correct answer is C. Advise the seller that such a clause is likely unenforceable under Alabama law and may be considered misleading, and explain the importance of allowing buyer inspections. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate a conflict between a client's stated desire and the licensee's fiduciary duty to ensure a transaction is conducted ethically and legally. Adhering to Alabama real estate law, the licensee must balance client satisfaction with their obligation to uphold professional standards and avoid misrepresentation or facilitating an illegal act. Careful judgment is required to identify the potential legal and ethical pitfalls. The best professional approach involves advising the seller that the proposed contract term is likely unenforceable and potentially misleading under Alabama law. The licensee should explain that while parties can agree to certain terms, a contract provision that attempts to circumvent established legal protections or disclosure requirements, such as those related to property condition in Alabama, may be deemed void or invalid by a court. The licensee's duty is to ensure the contract accurately reflects a legally sound agreement and to advise the client on the implications of such a clause. This aligns with the Alabama real estate license law, which mandates honesty, fairness, and full disclosure and prohibits misrepresentation. Facilitating a contract with a clause known to be legally questionable would violate these principles. An incorrect approach would be to simply include the clause as requested by the seller without comment. This fails to uphold the licensee's duty of care and fiduciary responsibility to the client. Alabama law expects licensees to provide competent advice and to ensure that agreements are legally sound. By omitting this advice, the licensee risks facilitating a contract that could lead to future disputes or legal challenges for the seller, and potentially disciplinary action against the licensee for failing to act in the client's best interest and for engaging in conduct that could be construed as misleading. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse to represent the seller due to this request. While a licensee can refuse to take a listing for various reasons, outright refusal without attempting to educate the client on the legal implications of their request is not the most professional or ethical response. The licensee has a duty to advise and guide their client within the bounds of the law. A further incorrect approach would be to advise the seller that the clause is perfectly acceptable and will be enforced. This is a misrepresentation of the law and a failure to exercise due diligence. Alabama law, like most jurisdictions, has established principles regarding contract enforceability and disclosure that cannot be unilaterally overridden by a contract clause. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the client's objective. Then, they should assess the legality and ethical implications of the client's request in light of Alabama real estate regulations and general contract law. If a request appears problematic, the professional's duty is to educate the client about the potential issues, explain the relevant laws or ethical considerations, and propose alternative, legally sound solutions that still aim to meet the client's underlying goals. Question 2. Strategic planning requires a real estate broker in Alabama to ensure all contracts are legally sound. A seller lists their property with you, and you present an offer from a buyer. The offer includes all standard terms except for the purchase price, which is left blank with a handwritten note stating, to be agreed upon at a fair market value. The buyer verbally assures you they will agree to a fair price. What is the most appropriate course of action for the broker to ensure the enforceability of the contract and uphold their professional duties under Alabama law? Option A. Proceed with the sale based on the buyer's verbal assurance of a fair price, assuming the buyer will act in good faith. Option B. Advise the seller that the contract is likely unenforceable as written due to the missing purchase price, and recommend that the seller and buyer negotiate and agree upon a specific price, memorializing it in a written addendum or new contract. Option C. As the broker, unilaterally determine what constitutes a reasonable price and insert it into the contract before the seller signs. Option D. Have the seller sign a separate document acknowledging the buyer's intent to pay a fair price without specifying the exact amount. The correct answer is B. Advise the seller that the contract is likely unenforceable as written due to the missing purchase price, and recommend that the seller and buyer negotiate and agree upon a specific price, memorializing it in a written addendum or new contract. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between a broker's duty to their client and the desire to close a deal quickly. The broker must navigate the complexities of contract enforceability while upholding their fiduciary responsibilities and adhering to Alabama real estate law. Misinterpreting or misapplying contract principles could lead to legal repercussions, ethical violations, and damage to the broker's reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure all parties' rights are protected and that the transaction proceeds lawfully. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves advising the seller that the contract, as written, is likely unenforceable due to the lack of a definite price, which is a material term required for a valid real estate contract under Alabama law. The broker should then recommend that the seller and buyer negotiate and agree upon a specific purchase price and memorialize this agreement in a written addendum or a new contract. This approach directly addresses the legal deficiency in the existing agreement, prioritizes the client's best interest by seeking a legally sound transaction, and aligns with the Alabama real estate license law's requirement for honesty and fair dealing. It ensures that any subsequent agreement is enforceable and protects both parties from future disputes. Incorrect approaches analysis. Advising the seller to proceed with the sale based on the buyer's verbal assurance of a fair price is professionally unacceptable. This approach ignores the statute of frauds, which in Alabama requires real estate contracts to be in writing and signed by the party to be charged, including all material terms. A verbal agreement on a price, or the expectation of one, does not constitute a binding contract. Furthermore, it violates the broker's duty of loyalty and care to the seller by exposing them to significant legal risk and potential financial loss. Suggesting that the broker can unilaterally determine a reasonable price and insert it into the contract is also professionally unacceptable. This action oversteps the broker's authority, as price is a material term that must be mutually agreed upon by the buyer and seller. Such an action could be construed as misrepresentation or fraud, violating Alabama's real estate regulations and potentially leading to disciplinary action and civil liability. Encouraging the seller to sign a separate document acknowledging the buyer's intent to pay a fair price without specifying that price is also professionally unsound. While it attempts to create a written record, it fails to cure the fundamental defect of an undefined material term. This document would likely still be unenforceable as a contract for sale, leaving the seller vulnerable and the transaction in legal limbo, thus failing to meet the broker's obligation to facilitate a legally sound transaction. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize legal compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with a contract that appears to be missing essential terms, the first step is to identify the deficiency based on governing law. In this case, Alabama contract law and real estate regulations. The next step is to communicate this deficiency clearly and professionally to the client, explaining the legal implications. The broker's role is to advise and guide, not to make unilateral decisions or to pressure clients into legally precarious situations. The ultimate goal is to facilitate a transaction that is both legally binding and in the best interest of the client. This involves ensuring all material terms are clearly defined and agreed upon in writing. Question 3. The evaluation methodology shows that an Alabama real estate broker is assisting a first-time homebuyer who has expressed a desire for the best possible loan. The buyer has a moderate credit score and a limited down payment. Which of the following actions best demonstrates the broker's adherence to Alabama's real estate financing regulations and ethical obligations? Option A. Focusing exclusively on loans with the lowest advertised interest rates, without thoroughly explaining associated fees, private mortgage insurance requirements, or the long-term implications of the loan structure. Option B. Suggesting that the buyer pursue a loan product that requires a down payment significantly higher than what they have available, based on the broker's assumption that this will lead to better terms, without exploring alternative programs. Option C. Recommending a specific mortgage broker the broker has a close personal relationship with, assuring the buyer that this broker will find them the lowest interest rate available, regardless of other loan terms. Option D. Discussing the buyer's financial situation and presenting a variety of loan types e.g. FHA conventional with PMI, USDA if applicable, that align with their credit profile and down payment, explaining the general terms, benefits, and drawbacks of each, and advising the buyer to consult with multiple lenders and a financial advisor. The correct answer is D. Discussing the buyer's financial situation and presenting a variety of loan types, e.g. FHA conventional with PMI, USDA if applicable, that align with their credit profile and down payment, explaining the general terms, benefits, and drawbacks of each, and advising the buyer to consult with multiple lenders and a financial advisor. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that a real estate broker in Alabama faces a professional challenge when advising a client on financing options due to the complexity of loan products and the potential for misrepresentation. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client makes an informed decision aligned with their financial capabilities and the Alabama real estate license law. The best approach involves thoroughly understanding the client's financial situation and then presenting a range of financing options that are suitable and clearly explained, emphasizing the need for independent financial advice. This aligns with the Alabama real estate license law's requirement for licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and competence, and to avoid misrepresentation or concealment of material facts. Brokers have a fiduciary duty to their clients, which includes providing accurate and comprehensive information regarding financing, an approach that focuses solely on the loan with the lowest advertised interest rate, without considering the client's overall financial health or the loan's terms and fees, is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a loan that is unaffordable for the client, violating the duty of care and potentially constituting misrepresentation if the broker implies it is the best option without full context. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to recommend a specific lender or loan product without disclosing any potential referral fees or business relationships. This creates a conflict of interest and violates the principle of acting solely in the client's best interest, as mandated by ethical standards and the spirit of Alabama's real estate regulations. Recommending financing options that are clearly beyond the client's demonstrated ability to repay is also a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the client's financial well-being, which is contrary to the broker's professional obligations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client needs and regulatory compliance. This involves active listening to understand the client's financial goals and limitations, researching and presenting a diverse set of appropriate financing options, clearly explaining the pros and cons of each, and strongly advising the client to consult with independent financial advisors or lenders. Transparency regarding any potential conflicts of interest is paramount. Question 4. Quality control measures reveal that a property listed for sale in Mobile, Alabama, was previously the site of a small manufacturing plant that closed 20 years ago. The seller, aware of the plant's history, instructs the listing agent to not mention the former industrial use to potential buyers, stating it is old history and not relevant. Agent knows that such former industrial sites can sometimes have residual environmental contamination. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Alabama real estate licensee? Option A. Comply with the seller's request and refrain from mentioning the former industrial use to potential buyers, assuming it is indeed old history and unlikely to pose a current risk. Option B. Offer a personal opinion to potential buyers that the property is likely safe, given the time elapsed since the plant closed, without recommending any professional assessment. Option C. Advise the seller that the former industrial use is a material fact that must be disclosed to potential buyers, recommend a professional environmental assessment, and ensure the buyer is fully informed of any findings before proceeding with the sale. Option D. Inform potential buyers that the seller wishes to keep the property's history confidential and let them decide if they want to investigate further. Correct answer is C. Advise the seller that the former industrial use is a material fact that must be disclosed to potential buyers, recommend a professional environmental assessment, and ensure the buyer is fully informed of any findings before proceeding with the sale. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate potential environmental liabilities that could significantly impact a property's value and a buyer's future use, while also adhering to Alabama's specific disclosure requirements and ethical obligations. The licensee must balance their duty to the seller with their duty to inform the buyer of material facts, especially those with potential legal and financial ramifications. The correct approach involves proactively investigating and disclosing known or reasonably discoverable environmental concerns. This aligns with Alabama's real estate license law, which mandates licensees to disclose all material facts known to them that affect the value or desirability of the property. Furthermore, ethical standards require licensees to act with honesty and integrity, which includes not concealing information that could harm a buyer. By recommending a professional environmental assessment and ensuring the buyer is fully informed of any findings, the licensee fulfills their fiduciary duties and legal obligations, mitigating potential liability for themselves and their client. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the seller's request to withhold information about the former industrial use and the potential for contamination. This directly violates the Alabama real estate license law's requirement to disclose material facts. Concealing such information constitutes misrepresentation and could lead to legal action from the buyer, disciplinary action from the Alabama Real Estate Commission, and severe damage to the licensee's reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to provide a personal opinion or guarantee regarding the environmental safety of the property without proper expertise or assessment. Licensees are not environmental consultants, and offering such assurances could be construed as practicing without a license or making negligent misrepresentations. This exposes the licensee to significant liability if contamination is later discovered. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to simply inform the buyer that the seller wishes to keep the information confidential without further action. While respecting the seller's wishes is important, it does not supersede the licensee's legal and ethical duty to disclose material facts to the buyer. The licensee must facilitate the disclosure of relevant information, even if the seller is reluctant. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and compliance. This involves understanding the specific disclosure requirements of Alabama law, identifying potential material facts, such as past industrial use, advising clients on the necessity of professional assessments for such issues, and ensuring all parties are fully informed before a transaction closes. When in doubt, consulting with legal counsel or the Alabama Real Estate Commission is advisable. Question 5. The efficiency study reveals that a proposed real estate investment in Mobile, Alabama, projects a significantly higher rate of return than comparable properties in the area. As a licensed real estate broker in Alabama, what is the most appropriate course of action when presenting this investment opportunity to your client? Option A. Focus on the potential for a quick sale and high commission based on the attractive projected returns, without delving deeply into the study's validity or the investment's inherent risks. Option B. Emphasize the high projected rate of return from the efficiency study to highlight the investment's potential, while downplaying any associated risks to encourage the client's interest. Option C. Critically analyze the assumptions and methodology of the efficiency study, identify potential risks and optimistic biases, and present a balanced projection of returns, including a range of possible outcomes to the client. Option D. Immediately dismiss the efficiency study as potentially unreliable and advise the client to seek investment advice from a financial planner without further analysis. Correct answer is C. Critically analyze the assumptions and methodology of the efficiency study, identify potential risks and optimistic biases, and present a balanced projection of returns, including a range of possible outcomes, to the client. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential discrepancy in how a real estate investment's projected returns are being presented to a client, raising ethical and regulatory concerns under Alabama law. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the licensee to balance their fiduciary duty to the client with the need for accurate and transparent representation of investment potential, while adhering to the Alabama Real Estate License Law and the Alabama Real Estate Commission's rules and regulations. Misrepresenting potential returns, even if not intentionally fraudulent, can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions. The best approach involves a thorough, objective analysis of the investment's underlying assumptions and potential risks, and clearly communicating these findings to the client. This includes scrutinizing the methodology used in the efficiency study, identifying any optimistic biases or unsubstantiated projections, and presenting a balanced view of potential outcomes, including worst-case scenarios. This aligns with the Alabama Real Estate License Law's requirement for licensees to act with honesty and integrity, and to avoid misrepresentation or concealment of material facts. It also upholds the ethical obligation to put the client's interests above their own, ensuring the client can make an informed decision based on realistic expectations. An approach that focuses solely on highlighting the most favorable aspects of the efficiency study, without critically examining its assumptions or potential downsides, is ethically flawed. This constitutes a misrepresentation by omission, failing to disclose material information that could influence the client's investment decision. Such conduct violates the Alabama Real Estate License Law's prohibition against fraudulent or dishonest dealings. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the efficiency study entirely without a proper review, especially if it was commissioned or provided by a third party. This could be seen as a failure to exercise due diligence and a potential disregard for information that, while perhaps flawed, warrants professional consideration and explanation to the client. It also fails to meet the professional standard of providing comprehensive advice. Finally, an approach that prioritizes securing the transaction over providing accurate investment analysis is a clear ethical breach. The licensee's primary responsibility is to the client's best interests, not to the closing of a deal at any cost. This can lead to violations of fiduciary duties and potentially expose the licensee to liability for negligent misrepresentation or breach of contract. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's investment goals and risk tolerance. They must then critically evaluate all provided information, including efficiency studies, by questioning assumptions, verifying data where possible, and considering a range of potential outcomes. Transparency and clear communication of both potential benefits and risks are paramount. When in doubt, seeking clarification or additional expert opinions is a sign of professional integrity. Question 6. The performance metrics show a significant increase in interest rates over the past 6 months, coupled with a slowdown in job growth within the Birmingham metropolitan area. As a real estate broker licensed in Alabama, how should you best advise your clients regarding current and future property values and investment strategies in this market? Option A. Recommend clients hold off on all real estate transactions until national economic indicators show a clear and sustained improvement. Option B. Analyze current local employment trends, interest rate impacts on mortgage affordability, and regional development news to provide a nuanced outlook on property values and investment viability. Option C. Focus solely on the national inflation rate as the primary driver of real estate market performance in Alabama. Option D. Advise clients that real estate values are cyclical and will likely rebound soon, based on historical patterns of market recovery. Correct answer is B. Analyze current local employment trends, interest rate impacts on mortgage affordability, and regional development news to provide a nuanced outlook on property values and investment viability. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Alabama to interpret current economic indicators and their potential impact on the local housing market, rather than relying on past trends or personal opinions. The broker must demonstrate an understanding of how macroeconomic factors influence real estate values and advise their clients accordingly, adhering to their fiduciary duties and the Alabama Real Estate License Law. Misinterpreting these factors could lead to poor investment decisions for clients, damage the broker's reputation, and potentially violate ethical standards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of current, relevant economic data specific to the Alabama market. This includes examining factors such as local employment rates, interest rate trends set by the Federal Reserve, which significantly impact mortgage affordability, inflation rates, and regional development projects. By synthesizing this information, the broker can provide informed advice on market conditions, property valuations, and potential investment opportunities or risks. This aligns with the Alabama Real Estate License Law's requirement for licensees to act with competence and diligence, providing accurate and up-to-date information to clients. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to base advice solely on anecdotal evidence or past market performance without considering current economic shifts. This fails to acknowledge that real estate markets are dynamic and influenced by evolving economic conditions. Relying on outdated information or personal hunches can lead to misrepresentations and poor client outcomes, violating the duty of care owed to clients. Another incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on national economic trends without considering their specific impact on the Alabama market. While national factors are important, local economic conditions, such as job growth in specific industries within Alabama or regional housing supply and demand dynamics, often have a more direct and significant influence on local property values. Ignoring these localized nuances can result in inaccurate market assessments. A third incorrect approach is to provide speculative advice based on personal optimism or pessimism about the economy, rather than objective data. This introduces bias and unprofessionalism, moving away from the broker's role as an objective advisor. The Alabama real estate license law emphasizes honesty and fair dealing, which are compromised by speculative or biased advice. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a data-driven approach. This involves continuously monitoring economic indicators relevant to their market, understanding how these indicators interact, and applying this knowledge to client situations. A structured process of research, analysis, and informed communication ensures that advice is grounded in reality and serves the best interests of the client, upholding professional integrity and regulatory compliance. Question 7. Analysis of a unique, owner-occupied commercial building in Mobile, Alabama, that has historically generated rental income from a portion of its space is required for a potential sale. The licensee has gathered information on recent sales of similar commercial properties and has also researched the cost to construct a comparable new building. Which valuation method should the licensee prioritize to provide the most relevant and accurate assessment of the property's market value for the seller? Option A, the cost approach, estimating the cost to replace the building and accounting for depreciation. Option B, the income approach, focusing on the property's potential to generate future rental income. Option C, a comparative market analysis, CMA, relying on recent sales of other commercial properties in the area. Option D, a combination of the cost approach and a comparative market analysis, without significant emphasis on income generation. Correct answer is B, the income approach, focusing on the property's potential to generate future rental income. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate licensee must select the most appropriate valuation method for a unique property type, balancing the needs of the client with regulatory compliance and ethical practice in Alabama. The property's specialized nature means that standard valuation methods may not yield the most accurate or defensible results, requiring careful consideration of each approach's strengths and weaknesses in this specific context. The licensee must demonstrate a thorough understanding of valuation principles and their application to avoid misrepresentation or providing misleading information to the client. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the income approach. This method is best suited for properties that generate income, such as a small, owner-occupied commercial building with a history of rental income. It focuses on the property's potential to produce future economic benefits, which is directly relevant to an investor or owner looking at the property's financial performance. Alabama real estate law and professional standards emphasize the importance of providing clients with accurate and relevant property valuations. Using an approach that directly addresses the income-generating potential aligns with the ethical duty to represent the property's value in a manner that is most meaningful to the client's investment goals. Incorrect approach is analysis. Relying solely on the cost approach would be inappropriate. This method estimates value by determining the cost to replace or reproduce the property, minus depreciation. While useful for new construction or unique properties with limited comparables, it does not directly account for the income-generating capacity of the building, which is a primary driver of value for this type of commercial property. This could lead to an inaccurate valuation that doesn't reflect market realities for income-producing assets. Similarly, exclusively using the comparative market analysis, CMA, might be insufficient. While CMAs are valuable for residential properties and can provide a general sense of market value, finding truly comparable income-producing commercial properties with similar lease terms, vacancy rates, and operating expenses can be difficult. A CMA might not adequately capture the nuances of the income stream, which is critical for this property type. Failing to prioritize the income approach, when it is clearly the most relevant method for an income-producing property, constitutes a failure to exercise due professional care and could be considered a misrepresentation of value under Alabama's real estate regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should first identify the primary purpose of the valuation and the nature of the property. For income-producing properties, the income approach is generally the most relevant. If comparable sales are readily available and highly similar, a CMA can supplement this. The cost approach is typically a last resort for unique properties or when other methods are not feasible. A professional decision-making process involves understanding the limitations of each method and selecting the one that best reflects the property's market value based on its intended use and income potential, always prioritizing client interests and regulatory compliance. Question 8. The review process indicates that a licensed real estate broker in Alabama has been asked by a potential seller to provide an opinion of value for their property. The seller is eager to list their home quickly and has requested the broker provide this estimate over the phone, based on publicly available online data and the broker's general knowledge of the neighborhood, without the broker physically visiting the property. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Alabama licensed broker? Option A. Provide a broad estimated range of value based on the online data and general knowledge, clearly stating that this is a preliminary estimate and not a formal appraisal. Option B. Rely solely on the online data and neighborhood knowledge to provide a specific dollar figure, assuming the seller understands the limitations of this remote assessment. Option C. Advise the seller that providing any opinion of value without a physical inspection is not possible and suggest they seek a certified appraiser for an official valuation. Option D. Politely decline to provide an opinion of value without conducting a physical inspection of the property and researching comparable sales in the immediate area, explaining that proper valuation requires first-hand assessment. The correct answer is D. Politely decline to provide an opinion of value without conducting a physical inspection of the property and researching comparable sales in the immediate area, explaining that proper valuation requires first-hand assessment. Explanation. The review process indicates a scenario where a real estate licensee is asked to provide an opinion of value for a property they have not physically inspected. This situation is professionally challenging because providing an accurate and reliable opinion of value is a core responsibility of a real estate licensee, and doing so without proper due diligence can lead to significant financial harm for clients and damage the licensee's reputation and license. The Alabama Real Estate License Law and the Alabama Association of Realtors Registered Code of Ethics emphasize the importance of competence and diligence in all professional dealings. The best approach involves a thorough physical inspection of the property and its comparable sales. This is correct because Alabama law and ethical standards require licensees to possess the necessary knowledge and competence to perform real estate services. A physical inspection allows the licensee to assess the property's condition, features, and any unique characteristics that might affect its value, which cannot be accurately determined remotely. Furthermore, understanding the current market conditions through direct observation and research of comparable sales is crucial for an informed opinion of value. This aligns with the principle of acting in the best interest of the client and providing services with a high degree of professionalism. An approach that relies solely on online data without a physical inspection is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the standard of care expected of a licensed professional in Alabama. Online data can be outdated or incomplete, and it cannot capture the nuances of a property's condition or its immediate surroundings, which are critical for valuation. This approach risks providing a misleading opinion of value, potentially violating Alabama real estate license law regarding misrepresentation and unethical conduct. Another unacceptable approach is to provide a broad range of possible values without a clear basis or disclaimer. While acknowledging uncertainty is sometimes necessary, a wide, unquantified range suggests a lack of thoroughness and competence. This approach does not fulfill the licensee's duty to provide a well-supported opinion of value and can lead to client confusion and dissatisfaction, potentially violating ethical obligations to be truthful and avoid misrepresentation. Finally, an approach that involves simply stating that an opinion of value cannot be provided without a physical inspection, without offering to conduct one, or suggesting alternative solutions, might be considered less than ideal. While it avoids providing an inaccurate valuation, it may not fully serve the client's needs. A more professional response would be to explain the necessity of an inspection and offer to perform it, or to clearly outline the limitations of providing an opinion without one, while still demonstrating a willingness to assist within ethical and legal boundaries. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client welfare, adherence to legal and ethical standards, and the maintenance of professional competence. This involves understanding the scope of services, the limitations of available information, and the potential consequences of providing inaccurate or incomplete advice. When faced with a request that challenges these principles, licensees should err on the side of caution, communicate transparently with clients about necessary steps and limitations, and always strive to provide services that are both legally compliant and ethically sound. Question 9. Performance analysis shows that a real estate licensee in Alabama is listing a property that includes a substantial farmhouse, several large barns, grain silos, and approximately 150 acres of cultivated land. The farmhouse is well maintained and suitable for occupancy. However, the majority of the acreage is actively used for crop production, and the barns and silos are integral to the farming operation. Which classification best describes this property for listing and marketing purposes under Alabama real estate regulations? Option A, residential property. Option B, commercial property. Option C, agricultural property. Option D, industrial property. Correct answer is C, agricultural property. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate licensee must accurately identify the primary classification of a property to ensure proper marketing, legal disclosures, and adherence to Alabama licensing laws. Misclassifying a property can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including potential disciplinary action from the Alabama Real Estate Commission, AREC. The licensee must exercise careful judgment to distinguish between property types based on their predominant use and characteristics, rather than superficial features. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves classifying the property based on its predominant use and characteristics as defined by Alabama real estate law and common industry understanding. In this case, the presence of extensive agricultural infrastructure, including barns, silos, and cultivated fields, clearly indicates that the property's primary purpose is agricultural, despite the existence of a residential dwelling. Alabama law recognizes agricultural property as a distinct category, and marketing it as such ensures that potential buyers are aware of its intended use and associated regulations. This aligns with the principle of providing accurate and truthful information to clients and the public, a core ethical and regulatory requirement. Incorrect approaches analysis. Classifying the property solely based on the presence of a dwelling unit without considering the overwhelming agricultural infrastructure is an incorrect approach. This overlooks the predominant use and misrepresents the property's nature, potentially misleading buyers who are specifically seeking agricultural land. Marketing it as purely residential would violate the duty of full disclosure and could lead to contractual disputes. Classifying the property as commercial simply because it has structures that could potentially generate income without regard to the primary agricultural operation is also incorrect. Commercial property typically involves businesses engaged in trade, services, or manufacturing, which is not the primary function here. Classifying the property as industrial due to the presence of barns and silos, without recognizing their direct support of agricultural activities, is a misapplication of the industrial property definition. Industrial properties are generally associated with manufacturing, processing, or warehousing of goods, distinct from the cultivation and raising of crops or livestock. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach property classification by first identifying the property's primary function and characteristics. This involves considering the majority of the land's use, the nature of existing structures, and any zoning or legal designations. When in doubt, consulting with experienced professionals or relevant regulatory bodies, such as the AREC, is advisable. The licensee's duty is to represent the property accurately and ethically, ensuring all parties have a clear understanding of what is being offered. Question 10. Process analysis reveals that a real estate broker in Alabama is advising a client on the potential future value of a property. The property's market value is currently $300,000. Over the past 5 years, the annual appreciation rates have been 4%, 6%, 3%, 7%, and 5%. What is the projected market value of the property in 1 year, assuming the average annual appreciation rate from the past 5 years continues? Option A, $315,000. Option B, $316,800. Option C, $321,000. Option D, $315,000. The correct answer is B, $316,800. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Alabama to not only understand market trends, but also to accurately forecast future property values based on economic indicators and historical data. Misinterpreting these trends can lead to significant financial losses for clients and damage the broker's reputation. The broker must balance client expectations with realistic market assessments, adhering to Alabama's real estate licensing laws, which mandate honesty and fair dealing. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the projected annual appreciation rate based on the average annual appreciation over the last 5 years, and then applying this rate to the current market value to estimate the future value. This approach is grounded in empirical data and provides a quantifiable, defensible projection. Alabama law requires brokers to exercise reasonable care and diligence, which includes using sound financial analysis when advising clients on investments. This method directly addresses the client's need for a projected value based on past performance, aligning with the duty of competence and due diligence. Incorrect approach is analysis. Projecting future value solely by adding the highest single year's appreciation from the past 5 years to the current market value is an unreliable and potentially misleading approach. This method ignores the variability of market cycles and inflates the projection by using an outlier, failing to represent a typical or sustainable growth rate. This could be considered a failure to exercise reasonable care and diligence under Alabama real estate regulations, as it presents an overly optimistic and unrealistic scenario. Estimating future value by simply averaging the last 3 years of appreciation and applying it to the current market value without considering the overall trend or potential market shifts is also problematic. While it uses historical data, it might not capture the full picture of the market cycle. If the last 3 years were unusually high or low, this average might not be representative of future performance, potentially leading to inaccurate advice and a breach of the duty of honesty and fair dealing. Using a subjective assessment of market sentiment and adding a flat 5% to the current market value, without any quantitative analysis of historical appreciation rates or economic indicators, is an unprofessional and arbitrary method. This approach lacks any factual basis and is highly susceptible to personal bias. It fails to meet the standard of care expected of a licensed real estate professional in Alabama, who must provide informed advice based on objective data. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize data-driven analysis when making financial projections. This involves understanding the relevant market cycles and using appropriate mathematical models to forecast future values. When advising clients, transparency about the methodology used and the inherent uncertainties in any projection is crucial. Professionals should be able to explain their calculations and the assumptions behind them, ensuring clients can make informed decisions. Adherence to the Alabama real estate license law's provisions on competence, honesty, and fair dealing is paramount. Question 11. Investigation of a real estate transaction in Alabama reveals that a broker, eager to close a sale, has accepted a borrower's self-reported income figures and debt-to-income ratios without independently verifying them against official documentation, and has also encouraged the borrower to downplay a significant personal loan on the application to meet lender guidelines. Which of the following best describes the broker's professional conduct in relation to Alabama's loan underwriting and approval process? Option A. The broker has acted in the borrower's best interest by facilitating a loan approval that might otherwise have been difficult to obtain. Option B. The broker has acted ethically by prioritizing the borrower's financial well-being and ensuring the accuracy of all loan application details. Option C. The broker has acted responsibly by verifying all borrower-provided financial information and ensuring the loan application accurately reflects the borrower's financial capacity and the property's value. Option D. The broker has acted diligently by relying on the borrower's provided information and assisting them in presenting a favorable financial profile to the lender. Correct answer is D. The broker has acted diligently by relying on the borrower's provided information and assisting them in presenting a favorable financial profile to the lender. Explanation: investigation of loan underwriting and approval processes in Alabama presents unique challenges for real estate brokers due to the state's specific consumer protection laws and the fiduciary duties owed to clients. Brokers must navigate potential conflicts of interest, ensure fair lending practices, and maintain transparency throughout the loan application and approval stages. The scenario is challenging because a broker might be tempted to prioritize a quick sale or a preferred lender relationship over the borrower's best interests or the accuracy of the information presented to the underwriter. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and comply with Alabama law. The best approach involves diligently verifying all borrower-provided information and ensuring that the loan application accurately reflects the borrower's financial situation and the property's value, as required by Alabama's real estate licensing laws and general principles of responsible lending. This includes cross-referencing pay stubs, bank statements, and tax returns, and ensuring that any appraisals are conducted by licensed and independent appraisers. This thoroughness protects the borrower from taking on unaffordable debt and shields the broker from liability for misrepresentation or negligence. It aligns with the Alabama Real Estate Commission's emphasis on honesty and integrity in all transactions. An approach that involves accepting borrower-provided information at face value without independent verification is professionally unacceptable. This failure to exercise due diligence can lead to the approval of loans that borrowers cannot afford, potentially violating Alabama's usury laws if predatory lending practices are involved, and certainly breaching the broker's duty of care. It also exposes the broker to significant liability for misrepresentation to the lender. Another unacceptable approach is to pressure the borrower to provide inflated income figures or to omit significant debts to meet lender requirements. This constitutes a direct violation of ethical conduct and potentially fraudulent activity, which is strictly prohibited by Alabama's real estate licensing regulations. Such actions undermine the integrity of the lending process and exploit the borrower. Finally, steering borrowers towards specific lenders solely based on the lender's willingness to overlook discrepancies or offer a higher commission to the broker is also professionally unsound. This creates a conflict of interest and may violate Alabama's fair lending laws if it results in less favorable terms for the borrower compared to other available options. Brokers have a duty to act in their client's best interest, which includes seeking the most suitable loan terms. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client welfare, regulatory compliance, and ethical conduct. This involves a commitment to transparency, thorough due diligence in verifying all information, and an understanding of the potential consequences of misrepresentation or negligence. When faced with pressure to expedite a transaction or satisfy a lender at the expense of accuracy or fairness, a broker must pause, consult relevant Alabama regulations, and reaffirm their fiduciary responsibilities to the client. Question 12. Comparative studies suggest that when an Alabama real estate broker represents both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction, which of the following actions best upholds the broker's legal and ethical obligations? Option A. Disclose the dual agency to the seller only after the purchase agreement has been signed by the buyer to avoid jeopardizing the deal. Option B. Obtain informed written consent from both the buyer and the seller, acknowledging the dual agency relationship and its implications before proceeding with negotiations. Option C. Inform the seller verbally about the dual agency situation and proceed with negotiations, assuming the seller understands the implications. Option D. Negotiate the highest possible price for the seller while simultaneously working to secure the lowest possible price for the buyer, without explicit written disclosure of the dual role. The correct answer is B. Obtain informed written consent from both the buyer and the seller, acknowledging the dual agency relationship and its implications before proceeding with negotiations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a broker to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with Alabama's real estate licensing laws, specifically regarding agency disclosure and fiduciary duties. The broker must act in the best interests of their client while also adhering to legal and ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresentation or undisclosed dual agency. The best professional practice involves clearly disclosing the dual agency situation to both parties and obtaining their informed written consent before proceeding. This approach aligns with Alabama's real estate license law, which mandates disclosure of agency relationships. By obtaining written consent, the broker demonstrates transparency and upholds their fiduciary duty to both buyer and seller, ensuring they are aware of the broker's role and potential limitations. This proactive disclosure prevents future disputes and maintains professional integrity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the transaction without informing the seller about the buyer's interest and the broker's representation of the buyer. This failure to disclose a material fact and potential conflict of interest violates Alabama's real estate license law, which prohibits fraudulent or dishonest dealings. It also breaches the fiduciary duty owed to the seller, who is entitled to know all relevant information that could affect their decision-making. Another incorrect approach is to inform the seller verbally but not obtain written consent. A verbal disclosure is a step towards transparency. Alabama law generally requires written consent for dual agency. Relying solely on verbal communication leaves room for misinterpretation and can be difficult to prove, potentially leading to legal challenges and violations of licensing regulations. A further incorrect approach would be to prioritize the buyer's interests exclusively and attempt to negotiate a lower price for the seller without disclosing the full extent of the broker's relationship with the buyer. This constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty to the seller and potentially misrepresents the broker's position, violating Alabama's real estate license law concerning fair dealing and honesty. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. This involves a thorough understanding of agency law and disclosure requirements. Next, they must assess the specific regulations of Alabama's real estate license law. The paramount consideration should always be transparency and obtaining informed consent from all parties involved, ensuring that all actions are documented in writing. Question 13. The investigation demonstrates that a real estate licensee in Alabama, representing a buyer, is assisting with a transaction where the seller has offered to pay a portion of the buyer's closing costs. The buyer is obtaining a conventional mortgage that will require private mortgage insurance, PMI. The licensee has not yet discussed the specifics of PMI with the buyer, assuming they will understand it once their lender explains it. Which approach best aligns with Alabama's regulatory framework and ethical standards for real estate licensees? Option A. Proactively explain to the buyer that while the seller may contribute to closing costs, the buyer will ultimately be responsible for the PMI premium, which will be included in their monthly mortgage payment, and discuss how this impacts their overall housing cost. Option B. Inform the buyer that the seller's contribution to closing costs will offset the PMI premium, making it a non-issue for the buyer. Option C. Advise the buyer that since the seller is contributing to closing costs, the PMI requirement is effectively covered and no further discussion is needed. Option D. Rely on the buyer's lender to fully explain PMI to the buyer, as it is a mortgage-related item. The correct answer is A. Proactively explain to the buyer that while the seller may contribute to closing costs, the buyer will ultimately be responsible for the PMI premium, which will be included in their monthly mortgage payment, and discuss how this impacts their overall housing cost. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate the complexities of private mortgage insurance, PMI, disclosure requirements under Alabama law, balancing the seller's desire to avoid upfront costs with the buyer's right to clear and accurate information. Failure to properly disclose PMI implications can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions. The best professional approach involves proactively educating the buyer about PMI, its purpose, and how it impacts their loan terms and monthly payments, regardless of who initially pays the premium. This aligns with Alabama's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards that mandate licensees act in the best interest of their clients and provide full disclosure of material facts. By explaining that the buyer will ultimately bear the cost of PMI, even if the seller initially pays a portion, the licensee ensures the buyer makes an informed decision about the loan and the overall affordability of the property. This transparency builds trust and mitigates the risk of future disputes. An approach that focuses solely on the seller's preference to avoid upfront PMI costs without fully explaining the long-term implications for the buyer is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the licensee's fiduciary duty to the buyer and violates Alabama's disclosure requirements by omitting material information about the financial obligations associated with the loan. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to assume the buyer understands PMI simply because they are obtaining a mortgage. Real estate transactions involve many complex financial components, and it is the licensee's responsibility to ensure all parties comprehend the material aspects, including those related to mortgage insurance. Finally, an approach that suggests the seller's agreement to pay a portion of the closing costs negates the need to discuss PMI with the buyer is also professionally flawed. While seller concessions can influence closing costs, they do not eliminate the buyer's responsibility for PMI or the need for them to understand its presence and impact on their loan. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and full disclosure. This involves anticipating potential areas of confusion or financial impact for the client, such as PMI, and proactively addressing them with clear, understandable explanations that are grounded in the relevant Alabama real estate laws and ethical guidelines. Question 14. Assessment of a property manager's response to a landlord's request in Alabama when the landlord is experiencing personal financial difficulties and asks the property manager to use rental income from the property to cover personal expenses, thereby potentially commingling funds and jeopardizing security deposit segregation. Which of the following approaches best upholds the property manager's fiduciary duty and complies with Alabama real estate regulations? Option A. Continue managing the property as usual without addressing the landlord's request or informing them of the potential legal ramifications of their proposed actions. Option B. Immediately inform the landlord of the legal and ethical implications of their request, emphasizing the requirement to segregate security deposits and proposing a plan to ensure compliance with Alabama law regarding the handling of rental income and trust funds. Option C. Agree to the landlord's request and use the rental income to cover their personal expenses, explaining that this is a temporary measure to assist the landlord during their financial hardship. Option D. Advise the landlord that the property management agreement will be terminated immediately due to their request, without further discussion or guidance on legal compliance. The correct answer is B. Immediately inform the landlord of the legal and ethical implications of their request, emphasizing the requirement to segregate security deposits and proposing a plan to ensure compliance with Alabama law regarding the handling of rental income and trust funds. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in property management where a landlord's personal financial difficulties directly impact the operational integrity of the managed property and the trust placed in the property manager. The property manager is caught between their fiduciary duty to the landlord, their obligation to the tenants, and the legal requirements of Alabama real estate law. Failure to act appropriately can lead to legal repercussions, financial penalties, and damage to professional reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately and transparently communicating the situation to the landlord, outlining the legal and ethical obligations of the property manager, and proposing a clear plan of action to address the rent diversion. This includes advising the landlord of the severe consequences of commingling funds and the necessity of segregating security deposits as required by Alabama law. The property manager must also document all communications and actions taken. This approach upholds the property manager's fiduciary duty by proactively addressing the issue, protects the tenant's rights by ensuring security deposits are handled appropriately, and adheres to Alabama's regulatory framework for real estate professionals and property managers, which emphasizes honesty, integrity, and proper handling of client funds. Incorrect approach is analysis. Diverting funds from the operating account to cover the landlord's personal expenses, even temporarily, constitutes commingling of funds and is a direct violation of Alabama law and professional ethics. This action erodes trust, creates financial instability for the property and exposes the property manager to significant legal liability. It prioritizes the landlord's immediate personal needs over legal mandates and the financial health of the property, ignoring the landlord's request and continuing to manage the property as if no issue exists fails to address the critical problem of rent diversion and potential commingling. This passive approach neglects the property manager's duty to inform and advise the landlord on legal compliance and risks, allowing the situation to escalate, potentially leading to further violations and harm to all parties involved. Immediately terminating the property management agreement without any attempt to rectify the situation or provide proper notice to the landlord and tenants is unprofessional and potentially breaches contractual obligations. While ending a relationship due to ethical concerns is sometimes necessary, doing so abruptly without a structured handover or consultation on legal requirements can create further complications and leave the landlord and tenants in a precarious position. Professional reasoning. Property managers must operate with a high degree of integrity and a thorough understanding of Alabama's real estate laws, particularly concerning trust accounts and fiduciary duties. When faced with a situation where a client's actions jeopardize legal compliance or ethical standards, the professional's first step should be clear communication, education of the client on their obligations, and the development of a compliant plan. Documentation of all interactions and decisions is paramount. If a client's actions are irreconcilably in conflict with legal or ethical requirements, the professional must consider their own professional standing and legal exposure, potentially leading to a carefully managed termination of services, but only after attempting to resolve the immediate compliance issues. Question 15. The efficiency study reveals that a licensed real estate broker in Alabama is approaching their license renewal deadline and needs to ensure all continuing education requirements are met. Which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to the Alabama Real Estate Commission's regulations regarding continuing education? Option A. Relying on the assumption that the AREC will automatically track and notify them of any deficiencies in their continuing education hours. Option B. Assuming that all real estate-related seminars attended over the past 2 years qualify for continuing education credit, regardless of AREC approval. Option C. Waiting until the week before the license expiration date to complete the remaining required continuing education hours from any available online provider. Option D. Confirming that all completed continuing education courses were from AREC-approved providers and that the hours are sufficient for the current renewal period, while maintaining records of completion. Correct answer is D. Confirming that all completed continuing education courses were from AREC-approved providers and that the hours are sufficient for the current renewal period while maintaining records of completion. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate professionals in Alabama, balancing the need for professional development with the practicalities of maintaining an active license. The Alabama Real Estate Commission, AREC, mandates specific continuing education, requirements to ensure licensees remain knowledgeable about current laws, regulations, and ethical practices. Failure to meet these requirements can lead to license suspension or revocation, impacting a professional's ability to conduct business. The challenge lies in identifying the most compliant and efficient method for fulfilling these obligations. The best approach involves proactively tracking completed CE hours and ensuring they meet the AREC-specific requirements for license renewal. This includes understanding the number of hours required, the types of courses that qualify, and the deadlines for completion. By diligently documenting and verifying that all CE credits are earned from AREC-approved providers and are applied to the correct renewal period, a licensee demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and professional integrity. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of last-minute issues or non-compliance. An incorrect approach involves assuming that any real estate-related education automatically counts towards CE requirements. The AREC has specific guidelines on approved courses and providers. Taking courses not on the approved list or attempting to use hours from a previous renewal period for the current one would be a direct violation of AREC regulations. Another incorrect approach is to wait until the last minute to complete CE hours. This often leads to rushed decisions, potentially selecting unapproved courses or missing the deadline altogether, jeopardizing the license. Finally, neglecting to maintain accurate records of completed CE can lead to disputes with the ARIC and potential penalties, even if the hours were legitimately earned. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to CE. This involves creating a personal tracking system, regularly reviewing ARIC renewal requirements, and scheduling CE courses well in advance of renewal deadlines. When in doubt about a course's approval status, licensees should always verify directly with the ARIC. This proactive and diligent record-keeping ensures continuous compliance and maintains a professional standing. Question 16. Regulatory review indicates that a real estate licensee in Alabama is assisting a buyer who is pre-approved for a mortgage and has expressed a strong preference for a lower initial monthly payment. The buyer is considering an adjustable-rate mortgage ARM or an interest-only mortgage, believing these options will allow them to afford a larger home. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee? Option A. Offer to help the buyer select the specific ARM or interest-only loan product that best fits their needs, leveraging the licensee's understanding of mortgage types. Option B. Explain the fundamental differences, risks, and benefits of fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, emphasizing that the licensee cannot provide financial advice or recommend a specific loan product, and strongly advise the buyer to consult with a licensed mortgage broker or lender to discuss their options and suitability. Option C. Strongly recommend an adjustable-rate mortgage, highlighting its lower initial payment, and assure the buyer that they can refinance later if rates increase. Option D. Advise the buyer to choose an interest-only mortgage, explaining that this will maximize their purchasing power and that they can sell the home before the interest-only period ends. The correct answer is B. Explain the fundamental differences, risks, and benefits of fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, emphasizing that the licensee cannot provide financial advice or recommend a specific loan product, and strongly advise the buyer to consult with a licensed mortgage broker or lender to discuss their options and suitability. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee in Alabama to balance the client's stated preference with the licensee's fiduciary duty to ensure the client understands the full implications of their choices, particularly concerning long-term financial risk. The licensee must act in the client's best interest, which includes providing accurate and complete information about different mortgage products. The correct approach involves thoroughly explaining the differences between fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, including their respective risks and benefits, and then recommending the client consult with a qualified mortgage broker or lender to determine the most suitable option based on their financial situation and risk tolerance. This is correct because Alabama law and general ethical principles for real estate licensees mandate that licensees provide clients with sufficient information to make informed decisions. While a licensee can discuss mortgage types, they are not qualified to provide specific financial advice or recommend a particular loan product. Directing the client to a qualified professional fulfills the licensee's duty of care and avoids the unauthorized practice of mortgage brokering or financial advising. An incorrect approach would be to strongly advocate for an adjustable-rate mortgage solely because it offers a lower initial payment, without fully detailing the potential for future payment increases and the associated risks. This fails to uphold the fiduciary duty to inform the client of all material facts and potential downsides, potentially leading the client into a financial situation they cannot manage. Another incorrect approach would be to recommend an interest-only mortgage because the client expressed a desire for lower initial payments, without adequately explaining that the principal balance remains unchanged and that payments will eventually increase significantly, potentially leading to default. This misrepresents the long-term cost and risk of the loan. Finally, agreeing to guide the client through selecting a specific mortgage product and advising them on which type is best for them, without being a licensed mortgage broker or lender, constitutes the unauthorized practice of mortgage brokering and financial advising, which is illegal and unethical in Alabama. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and directs them to appropriate specialists when the licensee's expertise is insufficient. This involves identifying the client's needs, explaining available options in general terms, highlighting potential risks and benefits of each, and then facilitating connections with qualified professionals, like mortgage lenders or brokers, who can provide specific advice tailored to the client's financial circumstances. Question 17. Consider a scenario where a real estate licensee in Alabama is representing a client who co-owns a property with two other individuals as tenants in common. The client wishes to sell their individual ownership interest in the property, but is concerned that the other co-owners will not consent to the sale. What is the most appropriate advice the licensee can provide regarding the client's ability to sell their interest? Option A. The client must obtain the consent of all other co-owners before they can sell their individual ownership interest in the property. Option B. The client can only sell their interest if the property is first partitioned by a court, and then they can sell their separate portion. Option C. The client's ability to sell their interest is dependent on the other co-owners agreeing to buy them out at a mutually agreed-upon price. Option D. The client can sell their individual ownership interest without the consent of the other co-owners, and the buyer will then hold that interest as a tenant in common with the remaining owners. Correct answer is D. The client can sell their individual ownership interest without the consent of the other co-owners, and the buyer will then hold that interest as a tenant in common with the remaining owners. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Alabama to accurately advise clients on the implications of different property ownership structures, particularly when one owner wishes to sell their interest without the consent of the others. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting these ownership types can lead to significant legal disputes, financial losses for clients, and potential disciplinary action against the licensee. Careful judgment is required to ensure advice aligns with Alabama property law and ethical standards. The best approach involves recognizing that the existing ownership structure dictates the rights and limitations of each owner. In this case, with no indication of a survivorship right, the property is likely held as tenancy in common. This form of ownership in Alabama grants each tenant an undivided interest in the whole property, and importantly, allows each tenant to sell, lease, or otherwise convey their individual interest without the consent of the other co-tenants. The new owner would then become a tenant in common with the remaining original owners. This aligns with Alabama law regarding tenancy in common, which presumes this form of ownership unless otherwise specified, e.g., through clear language indicating joint tenancy with right of survivorship. An incorrect approach would be to advise the client that they can force a sale of the entire property or that the other co-tenants must consent to the sale of the individual interest. This misunderstands the fundamental rights of a tenant in common in Alabama, who has the right to alienate their own share independently. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the property is held in joint tenancy without clear evidence of the right of survivorship, which is not automatically presumed in Alabama. If it were joint tenancy, the sale of one tenant's interest would sever the joint tenancy, converting it to tenancy in common. However, the primary error is advising that consent is needed for the sale of an individual interest in a tenancy in common. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the exact form of ownership based on the deed and Alabama law. If the deed is unclear, they should advise the client to seek legal counsel to clarify the ownership structure. Once the ownership type is understood, the licensee can accurately explain the rights and responsibilities of each co-owner, including the ability to sell individual interests and the potential consequences for the remaining co-owners, such as becoming tenants in common with a new party. Question 18. Upon reviewing a potential investment property in Alabama, an investor expresses an urgent need for financing to close quickly. The investor is considering a hard money loan due to its rapid approval process, but is also open to seller financing. As their real estate broker, what is the most responsible and ethically sound course of action to ensure the investor makes an informed decision? Option A. Provide a general overview of both financing types, focusing on the basic mechanics of each, and leave the decision entirely to the investor without offering specific guidance on risk assessment or the importance of independent legal and financial review. Option B. Push the investor towards the seller financing option, as it generally involves less complex terms and may appear more favorable, without thoroughly exploring the investor's risk tolerance or the specific advantages and disadvantages of hard money loans. Option C. Fully explain the terms, risks, and potential consequences of hard money loans, including higher interest rates and foreclosure risks, and discuss the specifics of seller financing, while strongly advising the investor to consult with an independent attorney and financial advisor before proceeding with any agreement. Option D. Emphasize the speed and ease of obtaining a hard money loan, highlighting its suitability for quick closings, and present seller financing as a secondary option without detailing its potential drawbacks or recommending external professional advice. The correct answer is C. Fully explain the terms, risks, and potential consequences of hard money loans, including higher interest rates and foreclosure risks, and discuss the specifics of seller financing, while strongly advising the investor to consult with an independent attorney and financial advisor before proceeding with any agreement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker in Alabama to balance the client's immediate need for financing with the ethical and regulatory obligations to ensure the client fully understands the risks and implications of different loan types. The broker must act in the client's best interest, which includes providing accurate information and avoiding misrepresentation, particularly when dealing with less conventional financing, like hard money loans. Correct approach involves thoroughly explaining the nature of hard money loans, including their typically higher interest rates, shorter repayment terms, and the significant risk of foreclosure if payments are missed, to the investor. This explanation should be clear, comprehensive, and tailored to the investor's financial literacy and risk tolerance. The broker must also discuss seller financing as an alternative, outlining its terms and potential benefits and drawbacks. Crucially, the broker should advise the investor to seek independent legal and financial counsel before committing to any financing agreement. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Alabama Real Estate License Law, which mandates that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interest of their clients. It also upholds the ethical duty to disclose all material facts and potential risks associated with a transaction, ensuring the client can make an informed decision. An incorrect approach involves downplaying the risks associated with hard money loans, focusing solely on the speed of funding, and omitting the crucial advice to seek independent legal and financial counsel. This failure to fully disclose the inherent risks and to encourage professional advice constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and potentially violates Alabama's real estate regulations concerning misrepresentation and client best interests. Another incorrect approach is to steer the investor exclusively towards seller financing without a balanced discussion of its potential downsides or a comparison with other viable options, even if the seller financing appears more favorable on the surface. This could be construed as a conflict of interest or a failure to provide objective advice, especially if the broker has a vested interest in the seller financing arrangement. A further incorrect approach is to present both hard money loans and seller financing in a purely transactional manner, without assessing the investor's overall financial situation or long-term goals. This overlooks the broker's responsibility to act as a trusted advisor, ensuring the chosen financing option is suitable and sustainable for the investor. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and informed consent. This involves a thorough needs assessment, a comprehensive explanation of all relevant financing options with their associated risks and benefits, and a strong recommendation for independent professional review. Transparency, honesty, and a commitment to the client's well-being should guide every step of the process. Question 19. When evaluating the suitability of government-backed loan programs for a client purchasing a property in Alabama, what is the most effective approach for a real estate licensee to take? Option A. Recommend a specific government-backed loan program immediately, assuming it will be the best option for the client without a detailed assessment of their qualifications. Option B. Emphasize only the low down payment requirements associated with government-backed loans, as this is the primary advantage for most buyers. Option C. Clearly explain the distinct eligibility criteria, benefits, and potential limitations of FHA, VA, and USDA loans, tailoring the information to the client's known financial situation and property type. Option D. Advise the client that all government-backed loans are essentially the same and offer similar benefits, simplifying the decision-making process. The correct answer is C. Clearly explain the distinct eligibility criteria, benefits, and potential limitations of FHA, VA, and USDA loans, tailoring the information to the client's known financial situation and property type. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate licensee must navigate the specific eligibility requirements and disclosure obligations associated with government-backed loan programs, such as FHA, VA, and USDA loans, while ensuring the client's best interests are met. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting these programs can lead to significant financial repercussions for the buyer, legal liabilities for the licensee, and potential violations of Alabama real estate licensing laws and regulations. The licensee must act with diligence and competence, providing accurate information and guiding the client through a complex process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly understanding the core eligibility criteria and benefits of FHA, VA, and USDA loans, and then clearly communicating these to the client. This approach prioritizes accurate information dissemination and client education, empowering the buyer to make informed decisions. Specifically, a licensee should explain that FHA loans are insured by the Federal Housing Administration, often allowing for lower credit scores and down payments. VA loans are guaranteed by the Department of Veterans Affairs, offering significant benefits to eligible veterans and service members, including no down payment requirements. And USDA loans are provided by the U.S. Department of Agriculture for rural and suburban homebuyers, often with no down payment. This detailed explanation ensures the client understands the unique advantages and potential limitations of each program relevant to their situation, aligning with the Alabama real estate license laws requirement for licensees to be competent and to disclose all material facts. Incorrect approaches analysis. Presenting all government-backed loans as interchangeable without detailing their distinct benefits and eligibility requirements is a failure to provide competent service. This approach risks misleading the client into pursuing a loan program for which they are not qualified or which may not be the most advantageous for their specific financial circumstances, violating the duty of care. Focusing solely on the down payment aspect of government-backed loans while neglecting other critical factors like credit score requirements, property eligibility, or specific veteran status for VA loans is an incomplete and potentially deceptive practice. This narrow focus can lead the client to believe they qualify when they do not, or to overlook other crucial aspects of the loan, thereby failing to meet the standard of full disclosure and competent representation. Recommending a specific government-backed loan program to a client without first assessing their individual financial situation, credit history, and eligibility for that particular program is premature and unprofessional. This can lead to wasted time and effort for both the client and the lender, and could be construed as steering or providing unqualified financial advice, which falls outside the scope of a real estate licensee's authority and expertise. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centric approach that begins with a comprehensive needs assessment. This involves actively listening to the client's financial situation, goals, and any specific circumstances, like veteran status. Following this, licensees must leverage their knowledge of available loan products, including government-backed options, to provide accurate, detailed, and comparative information. The emphasis should always be on education and empowerment, allowing the client to make an informed decision. If the licensee's knowledge is insufficient, they should refer the client to a qualified mortgage professional for detailed guidance on loan products. This process ensures compliance with ethical duties and regulatory requirements for competence and disclosure. Question 20. The analysis reveals that an Alabama real estate broker has received 2 offers for client's property. Offer A is for $300,000 with a 5% commission to the broker. Offer B is for $315,000 with a 5% commission to the broker. The broker believes offer B will take longer to close and may involve more negotiation, potentially delaying their commission. If the broker advises the client to accept offer A, what is the difference in the broker's potential commission between the 2 offers, assuming both close successfully? Option A. The difference in commission is $750, with offer A yielding $15,750 and offer B yielding $15,000. Option B. The difference in commission is $500, with offer A yielding $16,500 and offer B yielding $15,000. Option C. The difference in commission is $500, with offer A yielding $15,000 and offer B yielding $16,500. Option D. The difference in commission is $750, with offer A yielding $15,000 and offer B yielding $15,750. The correct answer is D. The difference in commission is $750, with offer A yielding $15,000 and offer B yielding $15,750. Explanation: the analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between a licensee's duty to their client and the potential for personal financial gain. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of Alabama's real estate licensing laws and ethical obligations, particularly concerning disclosure and fiduciary duties. The licensee must prioritize the client's best interests above their own, even when faced with a financially advantageous alternative. The best professional approach involves transparently disclosing all material facts to the client, including the existence of a higher offer and the potential for a higher commission. This approach upholds the licensee's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest and comply with Alabama's real estate license law, which mandates honesty, fair dealing, and full disclosure of all material facts. By presenting all options and allowing the client to make an informed decision, the licensee demonstrates integrity and adherence to professional standards. An approach that involves pressuring the client to accept the lower offer to secure a quicker commission without fully disclosing the superior offer constitutes a serious ethical and regulatory violation. This action breaches the fiduciary duty of loyalty and good faith, potentially leading to a claim of misrepresentation or fraud under Alabama law. It prioritizes the licensee's immediate financial gain over the client's potential benefit, undermining the trust essential to the client-licensee relationship. Another unacceptable approach is to unilaterally reject the higher offer without consulting the client, based on the assumption that the client would prefer a faster closing. This demonstrates a lack of respect for the client's autonomy and decision-making authority. It also fails to meet the disclosure requirements mandated by Alabama's real estate license law, which obligates licensees to inform clients of all offers received. Finally, an approach where the licensee attempts to negotiate a higher commission with the seller based on the existence of the higher offer, without the seller's explicit consent and understanding, is also professionally unsound. This could be construed as a conflict of interest and a violation of the duty to represent the client's interests honestly and fairly. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with identifying their fiduciary duties and legal obligations. They must then evaluate all potential courses of action against these duties, prioritizing transparency, honesty, and the client's best interests. When faced with a conflict between personal gain and client benefit, the ethical and legal imperative is always to disclose and allow the client to direct the course of action.